Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the launch of the International Energy Agency's new Global Critical Minerals Outlook 2025, our annual publication that assesses the global state of play for key energy-related strategic minerals in terms of supply, demand, investment, innovation, and more. I'm Jethro Mullen, head of the IEA's communications team, and I'm joined today by IEA Executive Director, Dr. Fatih Birol, by our Chief Energy Economist, Tim Gould, and by our Head of Energy Minerals Analysis, Tae-Yoon Kim. And Tae-Yoon is also the lead author of this report. I would just note that this report is freely available on the IEA website, along with an updated and expanded data explorer, which allows you to dig into the data yourselves. So during today's event, Dr. Birol will make some opening remarks, and then Tim and Tae-Yoon will present the key findings of the report. We'll then take questions from journalists. For the journalists taking part in this press webinar, we invite you to send your questions via the Q&A function in the Zoom. You can do this at any point during the presentation, and we'll also take a 2-minute break right after the presentation for you to enter your questions. And with that, I'll hand over to our Executive Director, Dr. Birol.
Thank you very much, Jethro. Greetings to everybody from the International Energy Agency headquarters in Paris. Dear colleagues, we are today to launch our report on critical minerals, the Global Critical Minerals Outlook. We first made a launch of critical minerals report. It was a landmark study in 2021, and since then we are building our capabilities in this area. And in the last 4 or 5 years, this report became one of the top reports of the IEA, very closely watched by governments, industry, investors, and others. And I was thinking, what are the reasons that this report in the last 4 or 5 years became so popular? I think there are 2 reasons for that. One is that globally, governments, industry, investors, academia, we all understood how important critical minerals are for energy, but also beyond. Their very important role for the manufacturing of many goods around the world. And if there is no one day that we don't read in the newspapers a news about critical minerals, an investment here, a trade dispute there, and a new mining activity in this country. There is a lot of news there. In fact, another example is last month in London, International Energy Agency and the UK government hold a Future of Energy Security Summit, which brought together more than 60 governments together from Asia, from Middle East, many governments from Middle East, from Latin America, from Africa, Europe, North America, and we discuss the traditional energy security risks such as oil and gas supply. But I can tell you that the discussions of tomorrow's energy security risks were also very, very lively. A lot of discussion on critical minerals. It was at the front and center of the government's interventions there. So the first reason why this report, in my view, became so popular is what is happening in the world and the greater recognition of the importance of critical minerals for our economic security, national security, energy security, and also their prices. The second reason here I want to talk about on the IEA, after we have understood that the critical minerals set to become a major issue for energy sector, we have, quote unquote, invested a lot. in terms of the resources, staff members, in terms of the data. IEA is well known with its data coverage on the energy sector. With one push, I can give you all the data on consumption, price, production of all energy sources. We have built in the last 4 or 5 years the same thing for critical minerals, and with our unparalleled analytical skills, we have developed a good, I should say, a coverage of the critical minerals at the IEA, and a lot of resources are devoted there. And I would like to thank my colleague Tim Gould, our chief energy economist, who oversaw these developments, as well as my colleague Taeyun Kim, who is the IEA's and the world's guru for critical minerals. Many thanks to them and their colleagues in the IEA. Dear colleagues, when it comes to this very report, my colleagues, Mr. Gould and Mr. Kim, will share with you some of the findings. But I wanted to highlight 3-4 issues I believe of strategic importance for governments, for economists, for industry and beyond. First, what we have done in this report is we have analyzed top 20 strategic critical minerals from A to Z, from production, mining, refinery, manufacturing, prices, investments, all the projects around them. And one thing is clear to me, those critical minerals tells me that it is not energy security. Of course, we are an energy organization. We focus on energy, but this is a economic security, national security issue. When we look at different critical minerals, I don't know, let's look at the silicon, for example, or indium or gallium. They can use for solar PV, but they are also used for artificial intelligence chips. And if you look at the rare earth metals, which is very much today, nowadays, in the news, rare earth elements, they can be used for electric cars, for example, another important topic for the IEA, but they are also used for manufacturing robots or drones, another important area of the defense sector. And zirconium, another strategic minerals, it is used for nuclear power plants, which are making an important comeback. But zirconium is also used for modern jet planes and aerospace area. So the energy is using a lot, energy sector, but at the same time, the different parts of the industry, aerospace, defense, batteries, many other areas. And when we look at our analysis of this 20 top strategic critical minerals, there are a few things that worry us, IEA. We are an energy security organization. What we like is diversification. In fact, what we see here is the opposite of it, namely concentration. For example, today, 19 out of 20 those strategic minerals, critical minerals, are refined largely in one single country. Number one leader of refining of these critical minerals is China. And China, in fact, of this 20 critical minerals, strategic minerals, China's share in terms of refining is about 70%, in fact, slightly higher. Another finding of the study, our report, my colleagues, Teyun and his team, look at the prices of the critical minerals, and they found out that in the last 10 years, the volatility of the critical minerals was stronger than or higher than the volatility of the oil prices. I mean, oil prices are well known to be very volatile, but the critical minerals prices were even more volatile. Another dimension that we need to pay attention from the IEA perspective is today, when we look at the critical minerals around the world, more than half of them are subject to some type of export restrictions, which can have serious implications for the supply chain of this energy sector or for this aerospace activity or whatever. So putting all of these things together, we think that from an energy security point of view, leave aside the economic and national security, it is an important area that the governments need to focus in the world. As I said, we look at all the critical minerals, and my colleagues will use some insights on that, but I pick up one of them, which is very important for the energy sector, which is copper. Why it is important, copper? Because, dear colleagues, when we look at the energy markets, we see that the electricity demand is growing, set to grow at unprecedented levels. In addition to the usual drivers of electricity consumption, we see that the global electricity consumption is also driven by new elements such as the artificial intelligence, such as electric cars, such as in many developing countries, increasing number of air conditioners. And electrification means, electricity means copper. When you build a transformer, you need copper. When you build electricity grids, transmission lines, you need copper. Electric cars, you need copper. Copper is used everywhere. So it is the reason we think that we need to look at the copper, and Teyun and his colleagues look at the copper mines around the world, all of them, from Africa to Latin America, Australia, everywhere. And they came up with, in my view, rather worrying finding. Looking at all the projects which are in the pipeline, if all these projects were to be implemented seamless terms without any problem, very soon, within the next 10 years of time, we are seeing a supply deficit of about 30%, 30%. Strong demand, but sluggish production coming from there. For several reasons, this is happening. For the reasons of not having enough investment. Some of the mines are becoming, the quality of the copper, the resources are getting poorer. The grades, ore grades are going down. And we see also issues in terms of infrastructure. All in all, we see that the copper may be a headache for the energy sector in the next years to come. And let's do not forget, it cannot be solved from one day to another. Because, as again, my colleague Teyun's and his teams, they look at all the projects completed up to now, and it takes, dear colleagues, on average, 17 years between you discover the copper in a mine and the first copper production happens. So 17 years. There is a long lead time. So it cannot come to the markets so quickly, an area that we thought is important to underline, as copper is very important for the energy sector. I say energy sector, but also other sectors. Copper is also important, for example, for defense sector applications too. Now, I would like to finish my words by two other highlights, at least from my perspective. The issue of diversification needed as soon as possible, because concentration is so strong in mining, but also, and more importantly, on the refining. Well, I said in the beginning of my remarks that there is a lot of discussion and, in my view, awakening of how important critical minerals are, but I believe a big chunk of it, of this awareness, goes to the mining of the critical minerals. It is diverse enough or not. This is important, no question about that. But maybe as important as mining, if not much more, is the refining. You cannot do much with the raw critical minerals if you do not refine it and make it ready for use. And we see that this is concentrated in a very high level in one single country. Anything can happen. There can be a extreme weather event, technical failures, earthquake, geopolitical steps. This can all have a major impact on the industry, economy, and the energy sector. So therefore, my suggestion is to governments around the world: you cannot solve this problem only by relying on market forces, market instruments. There is a need for government policies, strong and urgently putting government policies to provide financing for the projects, both for mining but also for refining, to put mechanisms in place to address the price risks, to provide mechanisms in order to guarantee the demand in many cases. In the absence of government policies, just relying on the market forces, this level of concentration will not come to a level of diversification that the IEA would like to see. In addition to that, I think it is important that countries, the governments around the world, build new partnerships, international cooperation between the resource-rich countries and the countries who are or will be able to build refining capabilities and others. To finish, International Energy Agency has identified critical minerals as an emerging topic for the energy security and national security almost 5 years ago. We built our capabilities here, data capabilities. It is unparalleled in the world. And we have our expertise here at the IEA, and it will be a cornerstone of the IEA work in the next years to come. And we are taking a lot of steps, how we organize ourselves at the IEA, how we communicate these issues, and it will be a major part of our work going forward. Together with other established traditional energy security concerns, critical minerals and the supply chains will be crucial for us in the next years to come. With this, I am turning back to you, Jethro, for I think it is now over to maybe to Mr. Gould, our Chief Energy Economist, with my thanks to you, Tim.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Executive Director. And it's a great pleasure to introduce some of the key findings from this work together with my colleague Tae-Yoon Kim. And Executive Director, you highlighted the importance of data. And I'd just like to come back to something that Jethro mentioned at the start. There is a wealth of information, data, projections, sensitivity cases around different assumptions on battery chemistries and so on. It's all available online. So please dig in and find much more information there. But what we're going to do now is talk through some of the key findings. And I'd like to start with where critical minerals markets were in 2024, because it's been another turbulent year and there was downward pressure on prices. And it's interesting to think through why that was. And it wasn't because demand let up in any way. Deployment trends for some key clean energy technologies remained robust. I think a week ago, my colleague Timur Gül, our Chief Energy Technology Officer, was sitting in this seat talking through our new global electric vehicle outlook. And he highlighted once again the important demand for batteries for EVs, and you can add to that batteries for energy storage and all sorts of other deployment trends. And that was reflected in the demand growth for key commodities. Lithium demand up by 30% or nearly 30%, significantly exceeding the 10% annual growth rate seen in the 2010s. Demand for nickel, cobalt, graphite, rare earths all increased by some 6 to 8% in 2024. And those types of demand growth rates, they significantly exceed those that we see for some more mature commodity markets such as oil, natural gas, and iron ore. However, demand growth was exceeded also by the growth in supply. You can see it on the screen for lithium, also for cobalt, also for nickel. And those supply increases were led by China, by Indonesia, notably in the case of nickel, Democratic Republic of Congo, and others. And that's the reason why we've seen that downward pressure on prices. And importantly, that downward pressure on prices has also weakened some of the momentum that we'd seen on the investment side. So investment in new critical mineral mines had been growing quite strongly in recent years, but notable slowdown in 2024, only around 5% growth year on year. And the same was true for exploration spending. So that didn't increase at all year on year in 2024. So a pause in that upward trend that we'd been observing over recent years. So continue to see some rises in exploration spending for lithium, for uranium, for copper, but year on year declines for nickel, cobalt, and zinc. So the upshot of that is that the prices are not really providing the signal to step up. Investment, and I think projects involving new entrants to the market have been most affected by that price uncertainty. And that's reflected in the findings that the Executive Director mentioned on diversification. Diversification, very central to the discussion on energy security. But what we've seen in recent years is that critical mineral markets are moving in the opposite direction towards greater concentration, particularly in that refining and processing area. So while in 2020, the share of the top 3 refining countries in global supply was on average around 82% across key energy minerals. Today, that number is 86%. And why is that? It's because pretty much all of the supply growth that we've seen in recent years has come from our leading suppliers. And you can see on the screen some 90% of supply growth came from the top single supplier alone. So that's Indonesia for nickel and China for cobalt, graphite, rare earths, and others. And we also had quite significant contributions from our top 2 producer, and again from the third in the queue. And in most other cases, supply growth has been limited. So remarkable supply growth, but it's really come from our incumbents. And we are tracking, as the Executive Director mentioned, all of the project announcements. And there are projects being developed now in a more diversified range of countries. But as things stand, progress towards more diversified refining supply chains is set to be relatively slow. So if we look ahead to 2035, the average share of the top 3 refined material suppliers declines marginally. So essentially it gets us back to where we were in 2020. A couple of words on the outlook for our supply-demand balances. And here we can note some improvements relative to where we were a few years ago. So for nickel, for cobalt, for rare earths, the growing number of announced projects means that expected supplies from those existing and announced projects, if they all come through on time, is catching up with projected demand growth. However, that's not true everywhere. Lithium is certainly one to watch, where we do project a deficit of supply relative to projected demand by the 2030s. However, please keep in mind that lithium has been an extremely dynamic sector, and there's a strong track record of getting new lithium projects up and running. We cannot say the same thing for copper. So despite strong copper demand from electrification, as the Executive Director referred to, the current mine project pipeline points to that potential 30% supply shortfall by 2035 due to declining ore grades, rising capital costs, limited resource discoveries, and the long lead times that the Executive Director mentioned. So that's a very strong signal to governments to expedite new supply projects, but also to look at other levers that can bring that projection more into balance. So a strong focus on recycling, but also a look at some substitution possibilities, for example, with the use of aluminium. And with that, I'm going to pass across to Tae-Yoon to talk through some of the security implications of our findings.
Thanks, Tim. As Tim mentioned, for some minerals like nickel, graphite, rare earth element, and cobalt, and the market may appear well supplied. But this does not mean there's some no risk from the supply disruptions because of high level of concentrations. So if somehow for some regions and the supply from largest supplier is disrupted due to natural disaster or technical failures or geopolitical restrictions, and the impact can be quite sizable. So if exclude, the market balance may well appear well balanced overall, but if we exclude the demand and supply from largest supplier producers, and the picture becomes starkly different. So available supply outside of today's largest supplier is serve only half of the remaining demand outside these suppliers. So this is entirely unable to meet the remaining demand. And this raises important question about the potential, the impact of security on the economy as a whole. And if supply disruption happens, and then it may raise the price for consumers, and also it can undermine industrial strengths. For example, in the case of graphite, sustained the price shocks out of the supply disruption can raise the battery cost by as much as 40 to 50%. And also it can hamper the pace of deployment. And also battery manufacturing, there's a lot of ambitions to build diversified the battery manufacturing supply chains in different parts of the world. But today there are some sizable cost gap between different producers. And any prolonged supply disruption can further widen these cost gaps between the prospective players and incumbent leading the producers. And then it can potentially hindering effort to build diversified technology manufacturing supply chains. And in this year, we expanded our scope of analysis beyond the 6 key energy minerals to 20, the broader set of energy-related strategic minerals. So the minerals you are seeing here. And these are used, in addition to the energy sector, they are used in a wide range of the end-user applications, including high-tech, AI, drones, robots, and defense, and aerospace, and also in making the manufacturing much smarter and also more efficient. But when we look at this, what kind of risk exposure these minerals face, and this is quite significant. There reveals the deeper the risks arising from high concentrations and price volatility, and also byproduct dependence. And on concentration, as the executive director mentioned, there are some concentration on the mining side, but the picture for refining and processing side is much more prominent. And China is the leading refiner for 19 out of the 20 minerals analyzed, with some average market share over 70%. And this is the compounding the risks of supply disruption if something happens in the largest producing countries. And this high concentration come into play in the context of growing the number of export controls and restrictions in the marketplace. So almost 11 of the 20 minerals we analyzed are already subjected to some form of export controls restrictions, which is posing a lot of risk to the security of supply. And also, around half of these minerals are produced as a co-product or byproduct of the primary commodities, limiting the flexibility supply to respond to any demand and price signals. In normal commodity markets, when there are some signs of market tightening or surging demand, usually the market gives signal to invest in new supplies. But this may not be the case for these minerals because the investment decisions is mainly underpinned by the market dynamics of the primary commodities. So these highlight the importance of the thinking through some buffers and some preparation against potential supply shocks. And also, there are some chances for substitution, but the chances of that is quite limited for these minerals because there are some major trade-off in cost and performance. And also, this year we look at the price volatility for the wide range of commodities. And what we found is almost 3/4 of these minerals have shown greater price volatility than oil. And half of them have shown greater price volatility than natural gas. And all in all, these analyses highlight the importance of looking at some interlinkages between different uses of these minerals, from the energy to high tech, and also the understanding some risk profile they face. And these minerals may have some smaller market size than the bulk materials, but impact of disruption can be far greater when it happens. So this is an area that IEA plans to expand our analysis further in the future applications. And we all understand there's some quite obvious we need more diversification. But why this is not happening in the marketplace? And one reason is because of higher cost. And we estimate the capital cost for refining projects in diverse regions are typically almost 50% higher than those in top producers. And compounded with the high price volatility and economic uncertainty, this is making challenging to make investment decisions for diversified projects. And so, as Executive Director mentioned, and given the scale of challenges, the diversification may not happen on the market forces alone. So we need some well-designed policy schemes to support this effort. Providing some financing support is a good step to bring the project online, but also we think there are some more structural, rule-based policy mechanisms to incentivize the investment decisions. For example, tools to mitigate price risks, such as the contract for differences or price cap and flow model, and also tools to provide some degree of demand certainties, or tools to provide some greater market access based on the ESG sustainability standard and ESG performance. For example, here we are showing some examples of the cap and flow mechanisms. So by providing some compensation when price go below the certain threshold, and also reclaiming the excess returns when price go higher, then it can provide the degree of the price, the predictability, and also mobilize the more private investment. Obviously, there are some impact on the public finances, but by well calibrating this reference price level, and we can reduce the investment barriers without imposing too much burdens on public finances. Finally, I'd like to highlight one more additional issues to the attentions and as a closure. So about the emerging supply chains for battery technologies. So far, we have been paying attention to nickel and cobalt for nickel-based lithium-ion batteries. But what we are seeing in the marketplace is the major rise of the lithium iron phosphate LFP technologies and other technologies. In 2020, 5 years ago, the LFP technologies, they accounted for less than 20% of the market. But now already in 2024, they make up the half of the electric car market. Also, they have some strong role in the energy storage applications. And when we look at the project pipeline for battery manufacturing, there are also some emerging technologies such as sodium ion that play the vital role. And supply chains for these new technologies such as LFP and sodium ion, on the one hand, they reduce dependence on certain critical minerals, but they are not entirely free from the supply risks because of the supply chain for these emerging technologies are much more highly concentrated in the few number of countries than the nickel-based technologies. This is the case for cathode materials, but also the case for the upstream the materials. And in our view, there are two materials are emerging as some potential choke point. That is, one is the battery grade, the high purity manganese sulfate, and phosphoric acid. And manganese sulfate is quite crucial in across all technologies, including nickel-based, LFP, and sodium-ion batteries. And phosphoric acid is very much crucial for the LFP technologies. And China, again, account for some 95% of the manganese sulfate supply globally. And also, they supply almost 3/4 of the global phosphoric acid productions. So there's some many regions, and sodium-ion batteries may offer some upside, the diversification potential, as the US and Europe playing some active role in soda ash and biomass supply. But this analysis underscores there's some good reasons to pay great attention to the emerging bottlenecks in this new battery technology supply chain as we build up the manufacturing supply chains in the market. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tae-yoon and Tim, for the presentation, and Dr. Birol for the opening remarks. So we now have time to take some questions from journalists. We invite the journalists in attendance to send your questions through the Q&A function of the Zoom if you haven't done so already. And please mention your media outlet along with your question. We'll just take a 2-minute break to give you a chance to enter your questions. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So thank you very much to the journalists for the questions so far. We'll get through as many as we can in the time we have remaining. One question we received, well actually two, from Nuran Erkal from Anadolu Agency, who asks, how likely do you think that critical minerals will be another front in the growing trade war across the globe, especially taking China's dominance into consideration? And then question two, what would be the biggest repercussions of a potential copper supply gap in 10 years' time in terms of clean energy transitions? And then another question regarding the IEA's role in critical minerals. Did you discuss these questions at the recent Energy Security Conference in London, Energy Security Summit, sorry, do you think that countries really understand the vulnerabilities that you've been talking about today? So perhaps Tim and Tayoon could address the first two questions, and then Dr. Birol could speak about the IEA more broadly.
So I think the first question is about how we can reduce these concentration levels, and in the context of some growing geopolitical tensions. And in the report, we highlight the importance of the diversification to reduce the supply, the disruption risks. And as we mentioned, and by market forces alone, this is not sufficient. So we think there's a need for some well-designed policy mechanisms. And as I mentioned, there are several tools that can help this process. By providing some public financing is one essential step to get the supply chain up and running. But also there is some need to reduce the price, mitigate price volatility by providing some degree of demand certainties, and also potentially providing the greater market access based on the environmental social performance. Those all can be a greater tool to help diversify and reduce concentration levels. And we think there are some serious discussions needed on these tools and in what context and they can be applied, and in what context they can be useful. So this is something that IEA is working very closely with our member countries to discuss some potential, the optimal suitable tools.
Thanks, Tayoon. And then Tim, on the copper angle, what could be the repercussions?
Yeah, thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for the question. So I think it's important to have in mind that when we talk about potential supply-demand gaps, I mean, that's not a thing that can exist in real life. That's a finding, but in practice, they will converge, and they will converge in a way that if we don't act, will result in significantly higher prices. So that adds costs and complexity to the electrification process that the executive director talked about, are particularly important given the high levels of electricity demand that we have seen in 2024, more than 4% growth in electricity demand last year, so well above the rate at which global GDP was growing. So I think that's the context. And then in terms of the actions, I think there's three things that we need to be focused on here. One is the speed at which we are able to get new supply projects to market. So there's permitting issues that are a big part of that 17-year lead time that the executive director referred to. Governments should be focused on that. But also we need to make sure that we have strong underpinnings of responsible mining there, because that's the best guarantee that you will see projects not just getting to market, but also operating in an uninterrupted way. Second important area is recycling. So there's a lot more that can be done to improve collection rates for copper, but also putting in place the facilities that can bring some of that secondary supply to market. And then a third area that needs to be looked at is where are the substitution possibilities? And you know, we mentioned aluminium because that's the one that can be used for various wiring, transmission activities. There is a trade-off in terms of connectivity in certain areas, so you need to be careful about how you apply that. But there are opportunities there which can bring down the cost of electrification, because aluminium is lower cost than copper. So there's avenues to mitigate the risks, but certainly the risks are there.
Thank you, Tim. And then I think there was a question on critical minerals at the Energy Security Summit. What were companies and countries saying there, and what needs to be done?
So our summit, Future of Energy Security Summit, brought some 60 governments around the world. These governments, they were major oil and gas producers, from Iraq to United States, from Norway to Canada, from Malaysia, Emirates, Kuwait, many countries there. But also there were many critical mineral resource owners, several Latin American countries, African countries, and others. Having said that, I think all the countries who are either traditional energy resource holder or the critical minerals resource holders, all the countries put a significant amount of emphasis on the security of critical minerals. But we use it not only for the energy sector, we use it for the entire economy. And it is the reason we have, from this conference, we felt that we made a good choice 5 years ago, a good decision to focus on this topic, build our capabilities, expertise, and most importantly, data on all the critical minerals and throughout the supply chain, from mining to refining to the markets and everything. So therefore, dear colleagues, we have at the IEA a major program. We call it Critical Minerals Security Program. We do many things there. We do, for example, market monitoring. It's a very important job to bring transparency to the market, what is happening where. The second, we are making some stress tests. What happens if there is a problem here in the this part of supply chain? What are the implications for the world? We do this. We also make recommendations to governments reviewing their vulnerabilities in terms of the critical minerals supply chain. So this is a major program at the IEA, and this has been endorsed, Jethro, with the comments and the questions and the suggestions coming from this 60 governments around the world, as well as top 50 energy and technology companies.
Thank you, Dr. Birol. So I think we have a few more questions. I think we can squeeze a couple more in. One is from Etienne Goetz here in France from Les Echos, asking, can you provide some data for mining and refining CapEx? What is the 2024 level in billions of dollars? And what should it be to achieve net zero emissions? Is there some, are there some metals with a high lack of CapEx? And then a question from Chloe Ferrand from Climate Home News, noting that you highlight the need for greater cooperation between countries to address the risks of supply chain disruptions. What form should this cooperation take? She notes that some people are advocating for an international treaty or a separate international organization on critical minerals. So what kind of international cooperation does the IEA see a need for? So Tayoun, perhaps you could speak a bit about the CapEx needs and where we are currently and where there any gaps are. And I don't know, Tim, if you know how we see things on international cooperation, building on, I guess, on what the executive director said about what the IEA is already doing. But Tayoun, over to you.
Yep, thank you. So we are checking the investment levels for the key energy minerals, including non-ferrous metals, and to understand the trend of investment happening in the marketplace. And what we are seeing is in recent years, investment has been growing quite rapidly, some 20-30% per year. But now in 2024, we saw some slowdown in the pace of investment growth, almost to 5%. And on the year basis, and it is just 2%. And in the report, and we estimate the future investment requirement to serve the projected demand levels in different scenarios. Under today's policy settings in our stated policy scenario, and we think for mining without sustaining capex, and mining needs some 500 billion investment between today and 2040. And this amount is greater in our announced project scenario, which reflect the country's climate ambitions around 600 billions. And this is far greater in our net zero scenario, almost approaching 800 billions. And today's spending and the spending requirement and all need some new investment. But as Tim Gould mentioned, and particularly COPO we need some more stepping up investment into new supply to serve demand growth. And also we think some continued investment need for lithium and other materials.
Thank you, Taeyoon. Tim, any thoughts on international cooperation?
So I think there's a few areas that we could mention, and I very much, of course, echo the words from the Executive Director about the importance of the Critical Minerals Security Program here at the International Energy Agency, because I think that covers a number of the very important areas that need to be covered in terms of emergency preparedness, in terms of the possibility of stockpiling and maybe the coordination of some of those stockpiling mechanisms, but also the importance of good data and market monitoring, areas that we are very much focused on here at the International Energy Agency. But there's a couple of other things that I think are worth mentioning. One of them is that when we think about responsible supply, there's been a proliferation of different standards, and I think there is a need for consolidation there, so that it's easier to understand the way that different minerals and metals are being brought to market. And I think there's another element which is important there, and it's an area we were working on closely with colleagues across at the OECD before, and that's the issue of traceability. Do we have the data and the information that we need on the chain of ownership or the way that different minerals have reached market? That's very important for consumers to know, if they are to feel confident that the minerals and metals that are being used in these new technologies are not being produced on the basis of environmental damage or different forms of social injustice in the producer countries. But a final consideration here is that when we're thinking about diversification, we need to, in a way, map out all the different bits of the supply chain and see how they all fit together. And because there's many countries have different resources, for instance, some graphite in Mozambique and Madagascar and other countries. But there are others that may have strengths in other parts of the value chain. And it's very important that we start to join the dots and put together a more integrated picture of how some of these new partnerships might work, and what are the instruments, whether that's offtake agreements or other de-risking mechanisms, that can help to bring a more diversified portfolio of projects to market. And putting together that picture, there's different initiatives there. There's the Mineral Security Partnership, but of course there's also the work that we're doing in those areas here at the International Energy Agency. And we're working very closely with our member countries to try and put together that network of collaborations and cooperations, also with producer countries, that can help bring a more diversified, a more resilient, a more secure picture for critical mineral supply in the future.
Thank you, Tim. I'm conscious we've gone quite a bit over time. I think we're going to have to wrap up. I just maybe ask the Executive Director if there's anything you'd like to say before we conclude.
Thank you very much to all the colleagues who follow us here, the journalists and the others. I just learned from our technical colleagues that more than 20,000 people around the world following this webinar for such a, in quote, technical issue. In fact, a very strategic issue. It's a good number. I think the colleagues rest assured that IEA is going to deepen its work on the critical minerals. We understand how important it is to have a secure but also a sustainable future, because many of the clean energy technologies rely on the availability and the affordability of the critical minerals. And together with the critical minerals, the supply chains are very important, and we also build a lot of expertise there. And of course, at the core of everything is the data. As we say at IEA, data always wins. So we are going to build our databases to a better data for mining, more data on refining, on prices, investment projects across the world, and we will provide more transparency to the markets. And we hope to see in the critical minerals sector more diversification. It is a cornerstone of energy security, and less concentration. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Birol. So as I said, we've covered as many questions as we can in the time we have. If any journalists have questions that didn't get answered, or just follow-up questions, we invite you to reach out to our press office, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Otherwise, thank you very much to Dr. Birol, to Tim, to Taeyoon. Thank you to the journalists for the excellent questions. And thank you, as Dr. Birol said, to all of you following this event online for your interest in our work. As noted, the full Global Critical Minerals Outlook 2025 is freely available on our website, along with the Data Explorer that allows you to dig into the numbers. So do please take a look. Thank you and goodbye.